block on the other end. Boston is fed, wrapped up by Nelson Adona. Oh, and Cunningham is down. My goodness.
What if I told you the moment that defined this WNBA season wasn't a buzzer beater or a championship celebration, but an injury followed by a smile? It happened in the second quarter of a regular game between the Indiana Fever and the Connecticut Sun. Sophie Cunningham, Indiana's emotional spark, rotated defensively to guard Bria Hartley, but Hartley lost control on the baseline and plowed straight into Sophie's knees. This wasn't a simple foul. It was a brutal, full-body collision. Sophie screamed on the hardwood, clutching her leg, and the arena fell silent. Fans knew instantly. This was serious. Sophie doesn't stay down, but this time she couldn't get up. Then came the moment that set social media on fire. Just seconds after Sophie collapsed, footage showed Bria Hartley standing nearby, smiling. At first, many thought the image was fake. But after reviewing angles, it became undeniable. She was smiling, even bouncing slightly. It didn't look like relief. It looked like satisfaction. Fans were outraged. Comments poured in. "This isn't basketball, it's assault in uniform." Others demanded, "Suspend her now." But the biggest shock wasn't the smile itself. It was the silence that followed, because those who should have spoken first, the league, the officials, the commissioner, said absolutely nothing, and that silence would become even louder than the injury itself. As the outrage grew, the WNBA remained quiet. No statements, no disciplinary action, no acknowledgement of the moment that had shaken fans everywhere. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert? Silent. Commentators downplayed the incident. Even the broadcast quickly shifted away, as if a player writhing in pain on the floor was just background noise. But Sophie's family refused to stay quiet. Her sister Lindsay tweeted directly at the league, maybe focus less on punishing players for criticizing officiating and more on protecting the athletes. Sophie herself retweeted that message, subtle but powerful. And her mother Paula was even more direct, accusing Hartley of reckless behavior, saying she's been trouble everywhere she goes. It wasn't just frustration in the heat of the moment. It was a family pointing to a pattern, a history, and fans agreed. Yet as all this played out, Indiana had no time to mourn. They still had a game to finish, and what the Fever did next would shock absolutely everyone. Down by 21 points in the third quarter, the Indiana Fever should have folded. They had no Caitlin Clark, no Sophie Cunningham. Their two leaders were gone. But instead of crumbling, they rose. Kelsey Mitchell went off for a career-high 38 points, refusing to let her team die quietly. Odyssey Sims, who had just joined the roster, added 19 and played like she'd been there for years. Aaliyah Boston dominated the paint, and with under a minute in overtime, Lexi Hull buried a dagger three-pointer. The Fever stormed back to pull off the largest comeback in franchise history. It wasn't just basketball, it was defiance. A statement, a middle finger to the league, to those who doubted them and to anyone smiling at their pain. But while Indiana rose, Hartley's history was about to drag everything back down. Fans didn't have to dig far for answers. Hartley's record was already filled with reckless moments. She had yanked Angel Reese by the ponytail. She had pulled Becca Allen to the ground by the head. She'd already been ejected multiple times. One incident might be excused as an accident. Two could be coincidence. But 3, 4, 5, that starts to look like a pattern. And when the league allows patterns like this to go unchecked, it isn't just the player at fault. It's the system around them. The WNBA wants to be seen as empowering women athletes. But how can it claim empowerment when it can't even guarantee safety? And Hartley wasn't the only concern, because suddenly, the whole league had an injury crisis. Sophie wasn't the only player to suffer this season. Caitlin Clark missed weeks with a groin injury. Sydney Colson tore her ACL. Aari McDonald broke her foot. 4 major players from one team sidelined in the same stretch. And still, the WNBA responded with silence. Yes, injuries happen in sports, but when they're caused by reckless play, when they're avoidable, they aren't just bad luck. They're failures of protection. This season has exposed a painful truth. The WNBA isn't protecting its stars, and fans are noticing. But through all the chaos, Sophie herself sent a message more powerful than words. Through it all, Sophie showed strength. She reposted photos of young girls in Future Fever shirts. She smiled for fans despite her pain. But she also quietly called out the league by retweeting her sister's words. Meanwhile, fans doubled down. They flooded comment sections, shared clips, tagged ESPN and league sponsors, and demanded answers. Why is Hartley still playing? Why hasn't Engelbert spoken? Why are referees letting this slide? Silence may protect the league in the short term. But long term, silence destroys trust. And now, the question everyone is asking: what happens next? So where does the story go from here? For Sophie Cunningham, the road ahead isn't just about recovery, it's about resilience. Fans want to know, how long will she be out? Can she return this season? And if not, how does Indiana rebuild without their heartbeat? Caitlin Clark's return is looming, and that could shift the Fever's momentum. But Clark alone can't replace Sophie's toughness, her defensive presence, or her leadership. This team now faces a test bigger than any scoreboard. It's about proving they can survive loss after loss and still fight their way into playoff contention. And then there's the league itself. The WNBA has a choice: either respond with action, protecting its stars, addressing officiating, and disciplining reckless behavior, or continue down the path of silence. A silence that fans, players, and sponsors are no longer willing to accept. Because here's the truth. This isn't just about one player's injury. It's about whether the league values accountability as much as it values marketability. And if the WNBA wants to grow, silence is no longer an option. But that leads us to the real heart of the story. Where do we, as fans, come in? This season gave us one of the most shocking moments in WNBA history. A collision that left Sophie Cunningham broken, a smile that sparked outrage, and a silence that spoke louder than any statement. We saw a family stand up against injustice. We saw a team rise from 21 points down and deliver the biggest comeback in their history. And we saw fans unite, demanding accountability. But this story isn't finished. Because whether Sophie Cunningham comes back stronger, or whether the league finally takes action, the WNBA's future will be defined by what happens next. And that's where you come in. If you believe Sophie deserves justice, if you believe players deserve protection, and if you believe silence should never outweigh accountability, make your voice heard. Smash that like button to show support. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how the league should respond. And subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive, where we'll break down Caitlin Clark's return timeline and how the Fever plan to adjust without Sophie. Because this isn't just about basketball, this is about accountability. And together we can make sure the league listens. Silence isn't strength, accountability is.